This is We All Be News and Radio.
Ron Hurd, get up out of bed. Let's go. Let's go. Ron Hurd. That's the word. Get out of bed. Give me a jingle. My number 051. Get out of bed. Let's go. Don't be afraid. This is Herb Smith calling you. Herb Smith. All right, I know you're famous and all that kind of stuff, but let's go. Get out of bed.
And welcome, everybody, for another infotainment edition of The Artivist Presents We All Be News and Radio. I'm your host for the Empowerment Hour, R2C2H2 The Artivist, and I am welcoming you back, family, for another wonderful, beautiful day. Any day above ground is a great day, regardless of the weather. If you are able to weather the weather, it means you're alive. You should be thankful for being alive. And we are thankful for you for joining us today. We have a wonderful show entitled Justice for Lynne Stewart. Once again, that's Justice for Lynne Stewart. That's the title for the show. We are in the process of getting one of her biggest advocates and supporters on to talk to you all today about why we should support this extraordinary person known as Sister Lynne Stewart. Feel free to join us for this conversation by calling in area code 646-652-4593. Once again, that's area code 646-652-4593. If you're scared to get on the air, give us a call, or not give us a call, but rather join us online at the URL. If you are able to access your computer, we're going to have the chat room up shortly. Like I said before, we are in the process of getting Brother Ralph Poynter to join us in. And since we're talking about Lynne Stewart, let's hear from the sister herself to see why we should support this wonderful people's lawyer, as they call it. Once again, this is Brother Ron, a.k.a. R2C2H2 The Artivist. And this is We All Be News and Radio.
Please give a warm welcome to Lynne Stewart. She's a defender of political prisoners and prisoners of war. She was convicted by the feds of terrorism for doing her job, the legal defense of a Muslim client, and at the time, Muslims were not very famous in America, as you know.
So somebody asked me, what do you do now that you're disbarred? I said, I agitate. Those who profess to favor freedom yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. Frederick Douglass. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be a both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Thank you.
And that was Sister Lynne herself quoting the ever-immortal Brother Frederick Douglass. Power concedes nothing without a demand. So true, so real. So much we need to act right now in terms of what's going on in the world today. And I want to get in my co-host, a special sister from the land of H-Town, Sister Queen Ashura. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon, Brother Ron.
Good afternoon, Sister Queen Ashura. Always a pleasure and a privilege to have you on today for the show. Are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you. It's going to be a great show.
It's going to be a great show. And speaking about greatness and great people, we on the line with none other than Brother Ralph, one of the biggest, probably the biggest supporter and advocate for Sister Lynne Stewart. And he has plenty good reason to be so. How you doing today, Brother Ralph?
I am so fine, and I am so happy to be on your program, to be able to carry this message of truth and justice to all of your listeners, because Lynne Stewart is the voice of truth and justice, and that is why she is in jail today in the land of injustice and lies. They have to shut her up. And I'm sure all of your listeners are familiar with Mumia and prison radio and the voices from prison. Well, they don't want Lynne Stewart's voice. Her voice is too powerful. Many people pay attention to it, so they have muzzled her. They put her in prison, and you get information secondhand. But continue with your questions that I cannot imagine what they are. So continue, and we can carry this message of Lynne and truth to your listeners.
Well, Brother Ralph, I guess one simple elementary question would be, who is Lynne Stewart? Why should we support Lynne Stewart? Who is she exactly? Why
I'm going to tell a quick story. Lynne Stewart is a white Irish woman who, when I had introduced her in St. Petersburg, Florida, to talk about Lynne Stewart, and when the film came on, after the film was on, a woman put up her hand and said, "You keep calling her Sister Lynne. She looks like white Irish to me." And I said, "She is white Irish, but the reason we call her Sister Lynne because she is one of the few people, professional or non-professional, who talks about the advantage of skin privilege."
Wow.
And when anybody talks about skin privilege, they become a traitor to the white race, because, as you know, the South won the Civil War in terms of the right to espouse white racial superiority, and it was supported by Ulysses S. Grant when he allowed Robert E. Lee's soldiers to take those rifles back to the defeated South and oppress all of the black people, the so-called freed slaves. Now, Lynne Stewart talks about that advantage through history and how it affects everybody white today, and how, as a white person, she has a responsibility to deal with truth in reality by supporting the attempts of people of color to even the playing field. As she says, more important than even the playing field is getting to the starting line to begin in the playing field. We don't have many people who do that or talk like that. And so we say, Sister Lynne Stewart, she is out there and she has defended people of color, and she's defended the aged, she defended women, she defended welfare rights, she defended the Black Liberation Army, she defended the Black Panthers, and she defended Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman. And this is the one that, as the boys say, they didn't put you in jail for your defense of him. They put you in jail because of defense of us for 30 years. And I believe there's more truth, more fact to that than fiction. So this is who Lynne Stewart is, a woman who grew up not 5 miles from Harlem, in Belrose, New York, in Queens, and as valedictorian, the smartest person in every class she was ever in, at 22 years old or 23 years old when she came to Harlem, she didn't know it existed. And she was shocked. And her response to me was, somebody's been lying to me, because I have paid attention. I have studied the books. I have studied the religion. I have excelled, and I didn't know Harlem existed. Therefore, something is wrong. And as she says, and I ask everybody, what is the nature of this? What is the cause of this? And she said, I was dissatisfied with the answers I got, so she had to find out for herself. And what she had to find out is, why would anyone say that these children were incapable of learning, that these children were different than any children in the world? And she found out the answer. They are not different. They live in a racist society that is intent on keeping us where we are. And she became a part of a society that was intent on making the words, the pious words and declarations, real. And there's only one way to make them real: live them. Lynne Stewart has lived them as a teacher, as an activist, and as a lawyer. And we could just go down the line of all of the cases she has done, and no more need be said. And I ask people to go to lynnstewart.org on your computer, and you will see the cases. You will hear her voice. You will see what she has done and is continuing to do in the prison that she is in, as much as they will allow her. And I will say that in prison, they sanction her. And when I say sanction, like 30 days without telephone calls, without stamps, without commissary, for doing what? For helping prisoners with their legal questions and for using her commissary to get food that would save people's lives. Because in federal prison, you can't get a vitamin tablet in. And she was found guilty and sanctioned twice for doing just that. Who are the prisoners? Who are the people in every prison in America? People of color, black, Latino, and poor whites. So they sanction her for helping these people. And it's nothing new. That's who Sister Lynne Stewart is. And cancer is eating her alive due to the lack of health care in prison. And as Lynne says, prison health care is an oxymoron. It does not exist. And two more examples. When Lynne, who was found guilty, now listen to this, Lynne Stewart was found guilty of conspiracy to kill American citizens overseas and to support terrorism with nothing to support it, because the jury was under the influence of the government, that you don't dare do what they did not want them to do. And as jurors I've spoken to afterward said that they knew full well Lynne Stewart wasn't guilty of anything, but that they punked out. This is the words of a juror. I punked out, as my neighbors said to me. I didn't have the heart to stand up against those who had an agenda of finding Lynne Stewart guilty. And when she was sentenced, and she was on bail, when the Second Circuit said she must go to jail instantly, she was scheduled to have an operation, a serious operation, that week in the New York hospital. And they said, never mind, she can go to jail and get the operation. Well, she went to jail, and it was 18 months later before she got the operation, and the attending physician said it was the worst case he had ever seen due to the fact of delay. And they knew she needed an operation. And then under a normal examination, they realized that there were spots on her lungs. It was a month later when they went back to check it. It was another month later when they went back. It was on both lungs and in her lymph glands and in her shoulders and bones. And then it was another month before she got treatment. 4 months after cancer had come back, metastasized, before she got treatment. And you say, wow, Ralph, why do you say they're trying to kill her? Well, the facts tell me they want to kill Lynne Stewart. Why do they want to kill Lynne Stewart? Because when Lynne speaks, people listen. She can speak in a manner that makes people listen. She has a photographic memory. She knows what she's talking about. And in the early 60s, we had an organization called Teachers Freedom Party, because we were all teachers then. And the motto was, the truth cannot be told so as to be believed and not understood. Well, Lynne Stewart can tell the truth so as to be believed and understood. And we all know now that we are living in a nation that puts the truth tellers in jail. We call them whistleblowers. Well, Lynne blew the whistle a long time ago when she said there was no terror in America. It was the government supporting terror to support their dictators around the world. And the Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman opposed Hosni Mubarak, the Egyptian dictator, and people should understand this. Nobody ran against him in 29 years because if you dared put your name on a ballot to run against him, you would disappear. But the United States government supported Hosni Mubarak. And 5 years after Lynne was attacked for defending, as an attorney, as defending the person of Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, the people of Egypt overthrew Hosni Mubarak. And one of the reasons why they said, when they approached the jury, they said that you can tell Lynne Stewart is a revolutionary and a conspirator with Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman because on the witness stand she said, any people who have the heel of the boot of oppression on their neck will throw it off by any means necessary. And I am not of the Martin Luther King persuasion. I am of the Nelson Mandela persuasion that refuses to renounce violence in the pursuit of liberation. And the government said, therefore, she supports the Sheikh. No, Lynne supports every people who would throw off the shackles of oppression, slavery, and anything else. And she says, during the period of United States of slavery, she would not have been a law-abiding citizen because she opposes slavery then and as she opposes slavery now. And the government said, therefore, she is a terrorist and she is in jail right now because she never took a step back from that position. She supports it. She supports every people's right to liberation, bar none. And this is why we are fighting for Lynne Stewart. She has supported the liberation struggle of black people, and she's not afraid of a gun. If black people use guns or whatever method they use, she supports it. Is it not for liberation? Are not black people human? And she can extend that to people of color around the world, which this government has not accepted as people, as human. And so Lynne Stewart languishes in jail, and we have our politicians, and I will conclude with Mr. Obama and Mr. Holder, and with a story when Ramsey Clark went to the White House in the Justice Department to talk on behalf of Lynne Stewart. And I will say Ramsey Clark because he's the ex-Attorney General of the United States, whose father was the Supreme Court Justice, who called Lynne Stewart and asked her to take the Sheikh's case. Lynne Stewart knew nothing about the Sheikh until Ramsey Clark called. And when Lynne said, why should I take this case, Ramsey Clark's answer was, because you have been of great service to your community, you have been of great service to the poor, you have been of great service to the people of color of this nation, and now I want you to be of service to your nation, and you would be of great service to your nation because the day is coming when America will have no friends in the Middle East, and we will be able to say, when your respected scholar was on trial, we had a fine attorneys to defend him. And he said to Lynne, and this is your job, the fine attorney. And I, to my shame, said to Lynne, do not do this because it's dangerous. I have seen racism and I have seen race hate, and I have images of black people hanging from trees. I have images of judicial lynching and extrajudicial lynching, and you're about to step into that pot all over again. And when Lynne thought about it, she says, I'm going to do this case. Will you do it with me? And, of course, my answer was yes. Your decision is to be respected. And here we are, very dangerous. Did Lynne commit a crime? Her only crime was not only proving the Sheikh innocent, she proved the American government's dealings and intricate involvement in all of these terrorist plots, namely World Trade Center 1. and her client was never charged or indicted for World Trade Center 1, but during the case of her cross-examination of Imad Salem, the informant, what would you call him, the person, the mover and shaker of World Trade Center 1 and the landmarks case in which Lynne was involved in, admitted on the witness stand that he told the FBI that the materials they had given to the guys who were in World Trade Center 1 were going to explode, and they told him, the FBI told Imad Salem to shut his mouth. And Lynne Stewart made him repeat it on the witness stand. And therefore, they don't need Lynne Stewart out talking about that case, and the judge says, well, it has nothing to do with this case. And it did not, except that Imad Salem let it slip that as an agent, an informer, an agent provocateur for the FBI, that they knew that the bomb was going to explode. And Lynne knew nothing about this. This was way before she even got involved with the shake. And so this is why Lynne Stewart is in jail. And I've just given you her history as to why I am an avid supporter of Lynne, because Lynne defends the Bill of Rights. We know that the Declaration of Independence was merely a piece of paper that meant nothing, because when they say all men are created equal, it was right in the middle of slavery. They were running a slaveocracy, and we worked to make those words real. Lynne Stewart worked to make those words real, and she says the basic words of the Bill of Rights must not ever be given up, because any right that you don't use or defend, you lose. Yes. She used the Bill of Rights. Every person has a right to a defense, and there's a right of freedom of speech. And she sits in jail for those offenses against this corrupt government. Now, I dropped this story when I talked about Ramsey Clark being at the Justice Department in the White House, and I asked, what type of reception did they give you? And he said, I gave them a reception. And I says, how so? And he says, I told them where Lyndon Johnson was sitting and what his voice was and where I was sitting when he told me to take the National Guard and desegregate the schools in the South. Now, whether you're for or against desegregation is not the issue. And I had said to myself, well, if you could listen to that and not listen to the proposal he had to allow Lynne Stewart to come home and die a decent life, then something is wrong. And I assume that these gentlemen who occupy their seats due to the civil rights struggle would melt and say, send Lynne Stewart home. They did not. This is what I'm saying. How could they, the beneficiaries of the civil rights movement, not support someone who was very active in that human rights struggle? With their hearts not melt, they did not. So we must do something different. She has complied with all of the 1984 Act regulations and requirements for compassionate release, yet she sits in jail. That's why I'm on my way to Washington. I will be in front of the White House and the Bureau of Prisons, Camp White House, Camp Bureau of Prisons, until Lynne Stewart is released, to have a chance at fighting for her life. Not her life, just a chance to fight for it. How can we not support that? Thank you.
Oh, that's beautiful. I mean, wow, there's a lot you have said. And, like I said, like I told my co-host, Queen Assure, before we started the show, that this is definitely going to be a teach-in, Lynne Stewart one-on-one, so to speak. And I'd like to ask Queen Assure, do you have any questions for Brother Ralph or any comments you'd like to make at this time?
Yeah. So, could you share with us again a little bit more about her request for compassionate release? Because isn't it true that, like, the warden has already basically granted her that? So what are the next steps, and what is the holdup in her being released compassionately?
Well, potentially, I don't want to get so involved, but the 1984 Act, says if you're within certain months of dying, then they can release you if you're not a threat to do anything, a threat to the nation. And I will digress for a moment. When they said while she was incarcerated in New York City, they were getting Danbury, Connecticut ready for Lynne Stewart. And this was the scuttlebutt. So I said to one of the prosecutors, how does one get a prison ready for Lynne Stewart? Tear out the telephones? She can't run. She's not going to climb over the fence. How does one get a prison ready for Lynne Stewart? And this is the thing, Lynne Stewart's words. And so Lynne Stewart has complied as the warden, has answered a letter was written to say, I wonder why Lynne Stewart has not been compassionate released, has not received compassionate release from the prison. The answer was that she doesn't fulfill the requirements. And the requirements are very clear. If you die within a certain amount of months, then they can release you. Now, we say we don't want Lynne released 2 weeks before she dies. We want her to be able to get in the struggle for her life because there are miracle cures. And one of the things we're in New York that people talk about is holistic healing, that she'd have decent food. Food is medicine, decent sleep, surrounded by people who love her. And Sloan Kettering, the last word in cancer care. She needs to be in this situation so that she can get in the race for her life. And she has complied. The warden at Fort Worth has signed it. The warden in Washington, D.C. has signed it, and yet it sits on the desk. Bureaucratic, I don't know what you would call it. And if I were to say it on your radio program, they would probably shut you down.
Well, go ahead and say it.
Bureaucratic, like morass that keeps Lynne Stewart from being free. And the other issue is they don't want Lynne free because she has a voice that can be heard. And people understand, and people believe, and it shows the government is guilty. So they want to silence her voice as they look to silence every other voice of truth. Lynne is the voice of law. That's the truth. And you have other voices, Bradley Manning, the voice of facts, Julian Assange, and the latest gentleman who is running for his life by telling what the government has done. Now, Lynne caught the government in their own snare in the voice of Ahmad Salem, who was an FBI informant, agent provocateur, who was also employed by the Egyptian government to ensnare Sheikh Omar Abdel-Rahman, who was working against Hosni Mubarak, the dictator in Egypt. Now, a side note to that is when Sheikh Omar Abdel-Rahman was in Afghanistan fighting or supporting the leader of the Afghani struggle who was recently killed, he was a friend of the Americans. We all know that. And then when he refused to sign a contract for a pipeline that was advantageous to the American government, then he became the enemy, Osama bin Laden. But we must remember, Osama bin Laden was at the Bush Ranch when they wanted him to sign on with the capitalist of America after Osama had beaten the Russians. Sheikh Omar Abdel-Rahman was a spiritual advisor to Osama bin Laden when they were fighting the Russians, and America loved him. And how did Sheikh Omar Abdel-Rahman get from Afghanistan to the United States? We know about passports, etc. He was brought here because he was a friend of the Americans and he was supposed to sit quietly. He was supposed to take a job with the Saudi Arabians and to be a mouthpiece for them religiously and live in wealth and splendor, but he chose not to do so. He took up the struggle against the dictator Hosni Mubarak, and therefore he became the enemy of the Americans. Osama bin Laden wanted more money than the corporations were able or were willing to depart with for the pipeline. He became the enemy, and they are both slated for death. Osama bin Laden is dead. The Sheikh is in jail serving life plus 60 years, and Lynne Stewart is in jail dying of cancer because she exposed it very clearly. And then when you add her history of exposing American duplicity and anti-democratic policies, then you understand exactly why she's there. But it is difficult for them because they have to hang it on something. So they said she was in a conspiracy to kill American citizens overseas. Oh, we don't know who it was. No, we don't know where it was. No, we don't know when it was. But all you have to do is believe us and find her guilty. And the jury believed them and found her guilty based on nothing. They brought up issues that had nothing to do with Lynne Stewart. They brought up Luxor, a situation where American tourists were slaughtered in Egypt before Lynne Stewart was on the case, who her client, the Sheikh, said that never should have happened, and the organization had nothing to do with his organization, and he opposed that type of action because it was anti-Muslim. They introduced that as step one in the trial. A gentleman came in and talked about that. What did it have to do with Lynne Stewart? Exactly nothing. And 700 times the judge had to say, this information is not introduced for the truth. It is not introduced against Lynne Stewart, but is only introduced as to what the state of mind of a third defendant might be, and they found it acceptable to introduce that in a case that found Lynne Stewart guilty. All of these things, constitutional rights, went out the window because they wanted Lynne Stewart in jail. And they have Lynne Stewart in jail. And then, as my father would say, what did you do? We must stand tall against this government and everyone in it who supports this type of lynch mob thinking. And I don't care the color of the person, who he is, or where he came from. It. This is lynch mob justice, injustice. Our sister Lynne is in jail, and I will be in Washington, D.C. starting tomorrow morning, Camp White House, in front of the White House and the Bureau of Prisons until Lynne Stewart is free, and I hope people from everywhere within hearing can join me for an hour, for 15 minutes, for a day, to be there to let the White House and the Justice Department know we are watching and we care what happens to those who care about us, those who support us. And Lynne Stewart has supported us in our truth ever since she was an adult, all of her adult life, and we can't let her down. Thanks again.
Well, I mean, you said so much information, so what my understanding is that you actually you're going to be camping out in front of the White House?
Yes, I'm going to be in front of the White House and the Bureau of Prisons starting tomorrow morning because Lynne Stewart has met all of the requirements for compassionate release.
Mm-hmm.
What is she doing there? How come she's not free? Bureaucratic morass or not? We have to say, okay, tell us why she can't be free. You've set the standards for freedom, and yet Lynne Stewart is not free. So who is the problem, and what is the problem? And I'll be out saying that with signs, and I hope many people will join me in saying you have regulations, You have bills and acts and laws that you pass, but we all know about that. But we're not going to hold still for it. You can say all men are created equal and then run a slaveocracy, and people are afraid to speak up. You can have the Fugitive Slave Act, and people did speak up because they changed the Fugitive Slave Act because they found out they could not enforce it, and too many people who tried to enforce it were being killed. That ended the Fugitive Slave Act. And so, therefore, we must end this fugitive acts that the government says that they are following, the 1984 Compassionate Release Act. And we must not allow them to make Lynne Stewart a fugitive behind bars with her life dripping out of her, giving it up to cancer when there is a possible cure in New York City, surrounded by her daughter, Dr. Ann Top. And I'm going to take the Northeast. You know, we always think that everything in the Northeast is better. We believe it. Get her back to New York, and we will cure her. And this is what the government is afraid of. They don't want Lynne Stewart cured.
Wow, I mean, you said so much. Just trying to digest all this stuff. Our listeners, I know they're actually trying to digest a lot of this stuff, too, as well. Because there's so much to unload there. Because our problem is that we don't have access to this type of information from places that call themselves news organizations that we get our news from. Like, nobody is really going to take the time to go into the details of what you just went into over the last 40 minutes about, you know, Lynne Stewart actually being, it seems like she's being punished for doing her job too well in terms of being a great lawyer, a great defense lawyer.
Precisely, and she was asked early on in her career, don't you know your job? And when she answered, the judge stopped. She knew here was one who did know her job and was going to do her job, and that was give people defense in an adversarial position, because that's what the American law is all about, adversarial conditions, and you make the government prove it. Lynne says, when we make the government prove it, we not only defend the rights of the person on trial, we defend the rights of everybody in America. You have a right to a defense. And when people lay down for one person, they will lay down on every person. And as one of the things, as a friend of mine says, the Lynne Stewart case proves that if you're in trouble, you dare not hire a lawyer. Because the lawyers lay down, and they put the one who refused to lay down in jail. It matters not who you're defending, and Lynne Stewart is honest. They said to her, Lynne, would you defend a policeman who killed a black child? And Lynne says, I would tell them down front they would get a better defense from somebody else because there is too much history behind white policemen killing black children for them to get the best defense from me. Right down front. No, I would not do that. Find a lawyer who could do that for real. And she would not make pretend because she feels that the institution of law must be respected by respecting the nature of the law, and that is an adversarial nature. You got to get by the attorney defending you. And she says, as I see myself as the last person standing between the government and its citizens, we must do our job. So she's very clear about what the job is. And you dare not lay down on the job for one person because it becomes a disease. And we know all too well about that diseased American judicial system that lays down any time it's a situation where it is the people versus the government. And I ask you to just figure out how much time, if you put all of the situations where a white policeman has killed a black child. Add all of their time up and find out how much time they spent behind bars. And if it's more than 15 minutes, I'll eat the bar.
Wow.
We know that. And so Lynne rages and rails against that type of injustice. And when she is your attorney, she says, when you get Lynne Stewart as an attorney, you hit the lottery because you get first-class legal defense and you get political education. Because she tells these young guys why they're there and that they better change their ways because this was what was intended for them the day they were born of color. And you see, this is, this type of representation is not what this government is happy with. And they put Lynne Stewart in jail because, as many of the lawyers said, Lynne, you keep poking your finger in the government's eye for 30, 40 years. And her answer is the government needs somebody poking their finger in their eye. And I feel so honored that I watched this woman work all of those years. And I could tell you stories right through to tomorrow about the cases she did and the way she did them. And she made the law profession almost seem honorable. And I say almost because it would take an awful lot to make this American legal profession seem honorable.
Well, it's like to me, that's the type of person, with the type of resume and mentality that she has. That's the type of person I would like to have on the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court. I wish they had more, people like that around. But the thing about it is, when you describing to me, it's like the legal profession is really like a blood sport, a gladiator. You got to be a gladiator in order to get through this. 'Cause, you look at Lynne Stewart, she's like, she got a grandmotherly presence. But don't let that fool you. You got that Irish streak coming out, that resistance, the rebellion. And I respect that immensely.
Well, one of the things that I don't like to repeat, but there's an element in our community who, when they're in trouble and somebody says, well, you're really in trouble this time, their answer is, it ain't over till the fat lady sings. Well, you know who they're referring to, and I never say that about Lynne Stewart.
Yes, sir.
Type of attorney, when she walks into the courtroom, this is what you need. But she's a person of compassion and understanding. I never met anyone with more empathy. She understands and says we must understand, but along with this understanding, we must have change. Continue to make the same mistake, to continue to offend the defenseless. And so this is, as I said, I could tell you stories all night long and into the next day about the cases she has handled, the cases for liberation, and the dignity in which she handles the cases, and the number of wins she has. It's one thing to stand up and defend the oppressed. It is another thing to win for the oppressed.
Let me ask you this, because we in baseball season, and I love sports, and sports come down to statistics and numbers. What are the number of wins that she has on her resume?
Wow, two things. They say Lynne Stewart has done more pro bono, that is free work, than the legal aid. And I used to keep the numbers, and she has the highest percentage of wins, and I stopped keeping the numbers 15 years ago, the highest percentage of wins of any lawyer anyway, and I'm talking about the top lawyers in this country. I'm talking about Bill Kunstler. I'm talking about the famous, give me his name, Darrow. She won more than Darrow, won more than Debs. And Bruce Cutler, she has won more. Her percentage it's like astronomical. And that's why when people were asking Lynne, who carried as high as 110 cases, active cases at a time, when people would say, Lynne, I want you for a lawyer, when Lynne would say, well, gee, you'll be 3 years in jail before I get a chance to even take your case because I'm so overwhelmed. People would say, I'll wait the 3 years. This is how successful she was.
Wow.
They would wait 3 years in jail and say, I'm waiting for my lawyer, Lynne Stewart. This is the confidence I have in her. And so you ask the percentage, put yourself in that position, and people have done it and said, no, I don't care who you have. I'm waiting for Lynne Stewart. And I remember a case for a very successful person who was accused of an economic crime, and he was very wealthy. And he went before a judge, and Lynne Stewart had been indicted for supporting terrorism on her case. But she was finishing up the cases, and the defendants had to be vetted to say, do you understand that Lynne Stewart has been charged by the government and that she may, sell you out to satisfy her own case against the government? And they would go over, and do you understand that you cannot appeal it if you have Lynne Stewart as an attorney, and on and on and on. Now, what do you say? And the young man said, and a not-so-young man said, I still want Lynne Stewart. And the judge's response was, well, you're smarter than you look. Okay, let's go Lynne Stewart.
Yes, sir.
And so this is funny. Well, the end of the story is Lynne Stewart took the case and won it. And
wow.
So this is who she is. This is what she means. And she charged each according to their ability to pay. Those who had a lot of money, she charged a lot of money. And those who had no money, she charged nothing. And when one of her clients said, Jesus, we have a top-notch attorney here, and I'm paying you big bucks, and I see you in the newspaper representing Joe Schmo who doesn't have a penny. And Lynne says, well, if you're unhappy with the representation, I guess you could let me know, let me go. And the answer was, no. And so she says, and there is your answer. Each according to their ability to pay. You don't meet them like that.
Wow.
As I could go on all night long with funny stories, etc. Lynne has represented the people. That's why she's called the people's attorney. And she has done it well.
I want to ask you a question. I know you said that you'll be in some of the White House camping out. For those people that can't make it to the White House, is there something that they could do, like call in to the Attorney General Eric Holder, or what could people do?
Please call the White House, call Eric Holder, and call Samuels, the Bureau of Prisons. Now, all of those numbers are listed on lynnestewart.org. Sign the petition to see Lynne Stewart get compassionate release. LYNNE Stewart, STEWART.org. You will see it listed there. And just sign on and make those phone calls, because we're going to continue calling while I'm camping out there with my signs, and people will join me as they have the ability to join. I've gotten commitments from Code Pink, or Women in Black, Medea Benjamin, Cindy Sheehan, Dick Gregory. They should all be there from time to time, and I tell them, whenever you can come, because I'm going to be there.
Oh, that's beautiful. Wow. But D.C. could get very hot. I mean, like, what, you got any backup? You got air conditioners in the tent, or what you got to help you out?
There is no tent. There is an umbrella, and I'm telling people, come when you can, because there's one person I guarantee will be there. Snow, heat, rain, whatever, I'm going to be there. Join me when you can. And I have a history. I don't know, you people, if you remember Banneker Swimming Pool, 1948.
So tell us about that.
Okay, that was, in those days, it was segregated, but only white people could be in it. And as a kid, we used to go down to the deep end where the white divers would do the cannonball, and you get the splash up in the air, and then on the breeze, you could get the moisture. And then one day we discussed, well, how is that in Anacostia you had a swimming pool that only white people could swim on? And then we worked up a plan, and that's when the riot, the Nichols Avenue, it took off. And the swimming pool was closed, and it didn't open for 2 years, but when it opened, it was open, integrated, and it has been black ever since. That is, do something when there's a problem. And I was that boy from up north who was there organizing. And my folks came down that next day because the police were looking for that boy up north. And my brother drove all night, picked me up, and drove back the next day, getting out of the South. But I'm familiar with Washington, D.C., the Anacostia swimming pool, and how you had to fight to get rights, and it is still a racist town. And when I got there in a Union Station in 1948, I could not catch a cab on the same side of the street as white people, so I walked home to Anacostia. That was Howard Road and Nichols Avenue in my new shoes, and my feet hurt fiercely, and I will never forget Washington due to that reality.
Wow.
I'm ready for the heat. I've been ready.
For the heat.
I would say to Mr. Obama, go into the basement of the White House and get that sign of Harry S. Truman that says, "The buck stops here," and put it on your desk.
Wow. Well, actually, speaking of politics, I mean, what has been the response from politicians? Or Chuck Schumer, some of the politicians. You laugh at that, but I want to know what has been the response from some of these politicians.
Well, Chuck Schumer's representation in the United States, in his Middle East policy and his votes dealing with issues of color. And it is the question of Israel. And the blind sheikh supports Egypt. And he opposed Hosni Mubarak. So you can imagine Chuck Schumer's representation, or his willingness to sign on to support Lynne Stewart. And as many attorneys have said to Lynne Stewart in New York, and I was there when they said it, and they say, "Lynne, I have been your friend for many a year, but if you take this blind sheikh's case, we are no longer friends." You understand? They are going to determine who gets representation. Well, Lynne Stewart says, "I'm not on anybody's side, but if I sign on represent somebody, I will represent them on that case, not on their issues." Because Lynne Stewart has long since said she has walked away from religious fundamentalism when she was 14 years old. And her folks were Dutch Reform. And she says that is enough religious fundamentalism for her, no matter what religion it is. And so she never supported religious fundamentalism. She supported people's right to a defense, regardless of what their position was in religion or without religion. But she was very clear she would never defend anybody of the Klan. She'd tell them, go get another attorney, somebody who can put their heart into your case. I cannot. And she was very upset when the NAACP supported the Klan's right to do anything. Their free speech was to destroy other people. And she would not do that. But she would be honest about it, about what she would do. They have a right to a defense, but she says, you can't get that defense from me. This is the honesty and clear position of Lynne Stewart. And so, no, there are many politicians who will not support Lynne Stewart because it opposes American foreign policy. And let us remember that the Philippines, Cuba, Vietnam, Venezuela, Brazil, Bolivia, all of these people have become enemies of American imperialism. Now, imagine those senators and Congress people who get their money from corporations that have oppressed people around the world. What would their position be in supporting Lynne Stewart, who supports liberation of people around the world? You can answer that yourself.
Wow. I want to ask you this because you talk about the cases she took, and she took some very interesting cases. Like I want to talk about, for example, Larry Davis.
Yes, Larry Davis, the dude that allude. He's a young black man in the Bronx in New York who shot 6 policemen in self-defense. And his mother came to Bill Kunstler's office to ask him to do the case, and Bill said he wouldn't do the case. And Lynne Stewart says, that's my kind of case, I'm going to do it. And then Bill said, well, if you do it, I'd like to do it with you. Well, Lynne Stewart took that case, and she did it, and she won it. And I wish everybody in America could have been in New York that night that the verdict came down not guilty. The mayor at the time was Ed Koch and said, you can't have self-defense against the police. And Lynn says, yes, you can. And this is what the black community needs, self-defense against a racist police department. And she added to it, which made people angry. And part of the reason why she's in jail is when she said they went looking for little black Sambo and they found black Rambo instead. And, you know, like it was lightning. And Lynne Stewart throughout the case was lightning, and her cross-examination of police. And it was just the most wonderful thing. And Lynn won. And they say, and that martyr for attack by this U.S. government. Self-defense. And as Lynn, in her own words, she says, whatever happened to self-defense and self-determination? In this active, non-violent resistance, whatever happened to self-defense and self-determination? She says, I remember it. Has everyone else forgotten it? This is why they are unhappy with Lynne Stewart. And I like to put it right down front. And what about the people that you vote for when you raise that issue that do not believe in self-defense and self-determination for black people? Lynne Stewart asked that question, and she asked everybody, go to your minister, go to your assemblyman, go to your state assemblyman, go to your congressperson and say, whatever happened to the defense of all people that Lynne Stewart gives? Where are you in that? And you will get some strange answers, some hemming and hawing, but they don't dare talk about that because they are in the pocket of the corporation. And Lynne Stewart talks about the corporations also. She says, because America has not formed the unity of working people, that the juggernaut of the corporations comes and there is no organization to stand in front of them because the people have not developed a race-free, age-free, gender-free organization that is powerful enough to stop them. These are the words of Lynne Stewart. Are you getting the feeling of her now?
Oh, wow, yeah. Also, you know what across my mind was the fact that she did not start off as a lawyer, but she actually started off as a librarian, correct?
That's right, a teacher.
So I just aid her in her success as a lawyer, though. I mean, she's really good at finding information. And
yeah, she's one of those people that, as she says, in my early career, I was a storyteller. Well, she uses that ability to tell stories, her knowledge of the law, and her feeling for justice in her law practice. And it is, like I said, I have been so privileged to watch her case after case after case. And one of the most impressive things when they ask her to address the Lawyers Association in New York, the legal aid. These are the people who go to work for those who cannot afford an attorney. And one of the attorneys said, Lynn, how do you get up for every case that you do for people who have no money? And she says, very simply, I just imagine that the person who is sitting in front of me or across from me has $1 million, and my mother is sick in a hospital, and the operation cost $1 million, and this person can give it to me. And whether they can or not, I go at their case like they have $1 million, and they're going to save my mother with it. And I says, what an answer. And that's the way she win at cases. And I can tell you stories of people who came in with no money on rainy nights, 7 o'clock in the evening, like they were drowned. and big criminal cases. And Lynne Stewart says to them, you came highly recommended. Highly recommended? How did you become highly recommended? From a person of goodwill, a community activist, a community teacher, a community organizer who would say, this is a case that deserves your expertise. That was it. And Lynn would take the case. And this is, could almost bring you to tears when you think about that. And when the judge said he sentenced, he says, another oxymoron. How is it a professional, successful lawyer has no money? Well, it wasn't about money for Lynn. She did what she had to do to get along, but she would take the big cases on the ability to pay. And if you didn't have an ability to pay, what she would say is her years in Harlem taught her that when a grandmother would come in and say, I don't know whether my grandson did this crime or not, but I know he needs a good attorney. And Lynn would say, well, listen, I am not paid by the state. I'm not legal aid. I'm a private attorney, and I have to have the money. And so when she said, when that grandmother would take out that worn wallet and unsnap that purse, whatever was in there was the fee. This brings me to tears when I think of those evenings when Lynne Stewart were working and whatever money came out, that was the fee. And she did the case. And one case that she was doing in one such instance, and the younger sister was very angry with Lynn. And when the not guilty verdict came, the young woman, she apologized. She says, I'm sorry, Miss Stewart. And Miss Stewart's answer is, do not feel sorry. You have no reason to ever trust a white lawyer.
Wow.
And I'm saying, when I think of that and I listen, I was there, and I'm too old to cry.
Mm-hmm.
When I get answers like that, don't apologize. What reason have you ever had to trust a white attorney? And, yeah, we won. And I'm saying, this is, and I saw it day in and day out. And and after every case, Lynn would say, well, when you take me to dinner, are you going to get the Dutch uncle talking to, or do you think it was a good case? And I would laugh. She was always humble. How did I do? What are your criticisms? And so she never got beyond that. And she is, and she says, never talk to me about was. She is a great attorney, and more important than that, a great human being. And this is why I say, hey, I'm going to stand out there in front of that White House in camp. No, I don't have a tent or an air conditioner. I'm going to be there because surely she has been of service to our community, that we cannot let her sit in a prison and die without a fight. Wow, the buck stops here, right in front of that White House.
Wow. Brother Ralph, I always think about all the stuff. It's hard to not want to help somebody like that. I don't understand. This is why they keep this type of stuff suppressed in the media, in the corporate media, because if you start having compassion or empathy for people, especially like a freedom fighter like Sister Lynn, then, what else? It's just, also I know you talk about, for example, she would not take the case concerning the Klan or whatever. But she did represent pretty notorious criminals like Sammy the Bull Gravano, for example.
Yes. And his wonderful case, he said, the greatest lawyer I ever had. Because when the issue came up, as he said to Lynn, why didn't you work for the mob? And her answer was, I would never tolerate being spoken to the way you guys speak to your attorneys. And she says, besides, you're racist. And Sammy says, no, we're not racist. And Lynn says, cut, you're racist. And then Sam laughed and he says, okay, he says, I admit to it, we're racist. So Lynn says she had a case back in New York, and I was doing the investigating down in Phoenix, Arizona. So Lynn had to catch a plane, so she says, I'm out of here. And so she says, work the case. And so when Lynn left, Sammy says, hey, we knew all about Lynn. He says, can I tell jokes we had about you too? Lynn being Irish and me being black. And I says, yeah, you could tell the jokes, as long as I can tell some Italian jokes. And so, and so it was. That's who Lynn was, right down front. Let's not mess around with this. Yeah, you guys are racist, and he admit to it. Okay, now we're past that. Let's get on with the case. And she did it. And the interesting thing was, he admitted to killing 19 people. And when the case was over, nobody called Lynne Stewart a mafioso. But she does the Blind Shakes case, and suddenly she's a terrorist. What is that about? We know what it's about. That's why I said it's very dangerous. This is racism. And, you know, like, you know the name they have for the Arabs. They are the San Ns.
Right.
And once you're an N, you're in trouble, and you become an N lover, and I'm familiar with this. And this is what happened to Lynn. She's defended a person of color who was a Muslim, and Islamophobia is rampant. And these guys are fighting back. They're not laying down. I never heard of, they talk about, it is opposing, violence is not something of Islam, but you never heard of a nonviolent resistance movement in the Middle East. They're not about that. And this is why I knew it was going to be dangerous. I didn't dream that they would attack Lynn for making a decent defense for a Muslim. But what's new? We all know about the South and lawyers who couldn't go there. Lawyers, you couldn't get a local lawyer to defend a black person accused of a crime. We've all been there. We know what it's about. Lynne Stewart is bigger than that. And the government and many other people hate her for it. This is where we are today. And like I say, we can no longer wait because cancer waits for no one. They would like to see her sit in that prison without medical care. And when I say without medical care, with the prison between you and the medical care that is available in Fort Worth, Texas hospital. And you get in line. Cancer doesn't wait in a line. Cancer moves on. And so they would like to keep Lynne Stewart in line and waiting for treatment and dying in prison. We don't want to see that. And the days are drawing down when she can even get to the race. You can't get in the race when cancer is eating your body alive. She has to get in the race while she still has something left of health. And this is why we must fight to see Lynn free now.
Brother Ruff, I definitely agree with you. I think anybody with a heart and with understanding about what's really going on in terms of our U.S. policy and our true republic, which is not democracy. We're not democracy by any means. This is not democracy. And I was thinking about slaveocracy. Yes, sir. And I was thinking about what's going on with your wife. I can't help. You said Dick Gregory showing support as well. But I had a chance to talk to Dick Gregory a couple of months ago because he also was involved in another case. This gentleman, this young black Korean War veteran named Clyde Kennard back in the 60s, who was, in Mississippi down there. He got cancer while he was serving unjust jail time, and they refused to properly treat him. And by the time he got released, he was flown back to Chicago to be with his sister. He got treatment from the University of Chicago, but it was too late. But, they knew that he had this cancer that was just eating him alive. And they wouldn't, let him get the type of treatment that he deserved. Because all he wanted to do was go to law school down in Mississippi. And he wouldn't let him go to law school.
Yeah, well, you see, that's over, too. They had too much success with people who went to prisons without a GED, and they would go in the prison and they would get their GED and then go to college and graduate. No, they're not about, remediation. They are not about, improving of people's lives. They are about punishing whether you are guilty or not. They are about creating fear, whether you should be fearful of the government or not. And so this is the situation that Lynne Stewart finds herself. And so this is why I say, everything has been done, all of the papers, all of the legal forms, and now we're waiting for cert to see if the Supreme Court is going to take her case. Well, we can wait, and if Lynne Stewart is dead, then it all becomes a moot question. We want to see the Supreme Court take the test because they never challenged the Patriot Act. And we want to challenge it with the case of Lynne Stewart. And she has a chance of winning because the Patriot Act infringed on the bill, the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech. Then they muzzle her. And so it is the Patriot Act against the First Amendment, among other issues around Lynne Stewart's question, around Lynne Stewart's life. What is going to be the answer? Well, we want to challenge it in court, and the papers, as again, the department that oversees whether the Supreme Court is going to take the case, has had 2 adjournments. So they put it back 2 months, effectively. Now do you get the picture? Delay, 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 and hope that Lynne Stewart dies in the meantime.
It's very, very unfortunate. So much injustice going on. She's so good. Go ahead.
You know what I think about, Brother Poynter, you said that she's in Fort Worth, Texas, and I'm right here in Houston, and, Houston is known for having some of the best cancer doctors in the world. People come in from all over the world for treatment for cancer. And if she's released, she could certainly come to Houston and receive some of that treatment, as well as a lot of holistic practitioners here. But there are so many interesting aspects around her case. Could you talk about how she was initially sentenced for 2 years, and then it was upgraded to 10 years? Could you share more of that information? I found that quite interesting.
Okay. What had happened was when they found Lynne Stewart guilty, the judge sentenced her to 28 months. Then the Second Circuit said 28 months isn't enough because she's not remorseful. Because when I asked Lynne Stewart if she would do it again, her answer was, I would like to think that I would defend the Bill of Rights again. That's all she did. And so the Second Circuit said she wasn't remorseful. And the judge had to give her more time. Now, the judge increased her sentence from 28 months to 120 months, and he cited 2 cases where the judge could change the sentence. One case was where a gentleman who had been convicted for child molestation, and he had a witness to say that he was of good character. And after he was sentenced, they found out that he had written a book, and he had about how to oppress women, and he had a video with him having sex with an 11-year-old child that they didn't know about. New facts, they increased the sentence. Then there was another case where someone who had been guilty of defrauding homeowners, and they sentenced the person. Then they found out that there were 2 more homeowners that they didn't know about to the tune of $800,000 that had been defrauded that had not been entered into the case. And so they had new facts, and they increased the sentence. And then in the case of Lynne Stewart, they said there were certain things that she said during her time on the witness stand that they didn't believe. And so, therefore, this was something that was already in the case. They said they didn't believe that she didn't know the name of a particular Muslim who was somewhere in the case. Had nothing to do with Lynne Stewart. But when she was asked if she knew who that was, and she said, I have no idea who that is. And they say she lied. And therefore, it was in the case, and they found her guilty in the case, and then they went and found her guilty again. In the same case, no new facts. But they used cases that had new facts as an example of how they could increase the sentence. And so there they go again. Each lie covering up the previous lie. And now you see, how could they do it? They just lied about it. They used cases that had nothing to do with anything, but they just said, hey, we don't have a new fact, but we're going to increase it anyway because we don't believe what she said on the witness stand. Well, that was already judged by the jury. And now we challenge those facts that were added. And this is what the Supreme Court challenge is all about. But in the meantime, Lynne Stewart, who had gone to jail with her cancer in remission, then the cancer came back, a very virile type of cancer, metastasized, and it is spreading quickly. And she sits in jail, where in jail you take a turn. When your turn comes up, you go to a local hospital shackled with 10 pounds to your ankles and feet, shuffling along, and where she fell out of a van once, and while you're in the hospital, shackled to the bed, not conducive to healing. This is what we have, case of Lynne Stewart. And we must fight it. This is why I say, join me in Washington. Make a phone call in support of somebody who has supported you, someone who has supported justice, someone who has supported the Bill of Rights, someone who opposes racism, sexism, classism. This is who Lynne Stewart is. And we must stand up and say we will not tolerate it. And I don't care who he is or the color of the people doing it. We say we love Martin Luther King, but we act in the face of his words. Judge not a person by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And we have Obama and Holder supported by 93% of black Americans based on their color. How about supporting somebody who supported you, supported your children, supported your grandchildren, who spoke up against injustices and against these guys who said, and these are the words of Mr. Obama when he was asked by Conyers, the head of the Black Caucus, how come you ask us for support and you never supported anything we supported? And his answer was, I didn't want to be tainted by the excesses of that movement. Excesses of the movement? Fannie Lou Hamer just wanted to vote. And because she did get the vote, you're in with the position you're in. And if that doesn't move you to do something on behalf of our Fannie Lou Hamers today who support that, who and what are you? And who are you as a person who would support someone in defiance of the words of Martin Luther King, who said, judge not a person by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, and yet we go right on supporting Mr. Obama and Mr. Holder. I do not understand. Oh, yes, I do understand. Let us begin dealing with truth. Let us not mimic the American government that has fine words and pious documents and then ignore them without somebody saying, what are you doing?
We go back, like what you were saying, you made some great points, but it reminded me when you were speaking about the Occupy movement and how I kept on thinking to myself, most of the people, it seems like it's 99%, don't want to get rid of the 1%. They want to join the 1%.
Exactly.
And that's the problem we have. People like words, but they don't like action.
In the words of Lynne Stewart, the problem with the movement is the people now are not sure whether they want to beat the man or be the man.
That's right.
Right on. And my adult life, I wanted to beat the man. Lynne's adult life, she said, you said the words, let's make them real. Or don't say the words anymore. And so, here we are. And like I say, look up LynneStewart.org. Sign on. Call your local preacher. Ask him to make phone calls. You call Eric Holder, Obama, or Samuels, anybody in the Bureau of Prisons. Call your local representative and say, what is your position on Lynne Stewart, who has a record, that is public and so many things, you find out about your representatives as to whose pocket they're in, who they receive money from. Well, Lynne Stewart is very clear in terms of whom she received money from and under what circumstances. And she received it from clients who paid for a first-class defense, period. And she used it to defend those who had no money at all, period. We know all about that. We know all about her standing on a corner and getting arrested because kids were killed by schools that needed a stoplight. We see the stoplights are there today. This is the work of Lynne Stewart. We see kids who had gone to college, who never would have gone to college without support by someone like Lynne Stewart. That work is there today. Now ask a congressperson what their record in the community is, and they will tell you of things they said, not of what they did. And so, I'm asking people to reach out to Lynne Stewart, reach out to the people you can reach out to, and you can certainly reach out to the people you voted for and say, this is what you voted for them for, to support you in the things that you need to support our community. And I can't think of a better way of supporting the oppressed communities of this nation than by supporting Lynne Stewart, because it becomes very real with Lynne Stewart being supported. This is what the government doesn't want. So, I thank you so very much for having me today. But like I said, I could regale you with the Lynne Stewart stories. And as Lynne Stewart says, don't talk of me as being dead. I am here. I am alive. Let's keep her alive. Let's get her out here into the hospital. And I love the young woman saying that they have great work, in Houston. Well, it's not a question of whether they have it. The question is, are they going to allow Lynne Stewart to access the health care of her choice? And to date, the answer is no. That's why we will be there fighting for her so that she can access the health care that she deserves, desires, and needs.
That's right. That's a very powerful statement you made. And also you said she won't back down or lay down for anybody, so she's a highly principled person, lawyer or not. But also I want to talk about, you said you can talk about Lynne all day long, and there's so many great things you can say about her, you already said about her. But I'd like to touch on something you told me a couple months ago when we first met, the time that she had a chance to represent Pablo Escobar. Can you talk about that story?
Yes. Yes, that's a very nice story. Anyway, you're familiar. I don't know if people remember the Ohio 7, and there was a gentleman named Richard Williams who was considered the armorer for the Ohio 7. They took a self-defense position that the state police, the largest manhunt in the history of America, was when the government went after the Ohio 7, and the government wanted them dead. Now, Richard Williams and Tommy Manning were down in New Jersey, and Trooper LaMonica recognized them. Now, Trooper LaMonica is the most decorated trooper of the Jersey State Police, but he's also a killer. He had killed many people, people who were mentally retarded, people who witnesses said were no threat, and Trooper LaMonica killed them, and he carried a .357 Magnum. And he came upon Tommy Manning and Richard Williams, and there was a shootout, and it was said that Richard Williams killed him in a shootout. LaMonica had emptied his .357 Magnum, and Richard Williams had emptied his 9mm. And as supposedly, this was the government's theory. And LaMonica died. Now, while Richard Williams was in prison at MCC in New York, I was, as an investigator, would go into the prison to talk to some of Lynne's clients. And one day I was in there, and Pablo had asked Richard Williams who is that guy who's walking around? He doesn't have a prison uniform on, but he doesn't have a suit because, I don't wear a suit. And he says, who is he? And Richard Williams said to him, well, that's New York's best investigator. And so Pablo says, oh, well, people who look like that in my country shine shoes. And so Richard, I go in there and talk to Richard, and he said, guess what this clown said? And, so he told me what he had said. And, I thought nothing of it. I says, well, another racist, whether he's Colombian or whatever. And so what happened was Pablo Escobar had, I don't know, it was $20 million in property in New York that they were looking, 70 million, some outrageous number that the government was looking to confiscate. Now, Pablo Escobar, through, listen to this, a mistake by a judge and a mistake by the court officers where the person before him who was on bail, the judge had said bail continued. And then when Pablo Escobar, who had no bail, was he couldn't get out of jail, and said the same. And now the court officers mistook that the same for being the same as the previous client and allowed Escobar to leave the courtroom that happened to have a cab downstairs, that happened to go right to the airport, that happened to spirit him out of the country as a mistake. Now, while the case came up that while he was there, that he needed a lawyer to protect his interest, and he wanted Lynne Stewart. And so when we found out, and Lynn knew what he had said about black people in his country were only to shine shoes. So Lynn said to me, well, you give him the answer, whatever the answer it is that you would give him. And my answer was, Mr. Escobar, I did shine shoes as a young man, a very honorable profession, and I shined them well. But I would not shine your shoes, and we do not need your case. And that was the last I heard of it. And now a gentleman named O'Dwyer handled the case, and as we understand, he saved the property and made $7 million.
Oh, wow. You said that $7 million.
We don't talk about it. And Lynn never said, gee, do you ever regret that? He never said that. And
wow.
so, and I'm not going to tell you what I feel, being that Lynn never asked the question.
Oh, wow.
But this is the type of person she is. She says, you give him the answer, and whatever it is, it is.
I want to ask you this, too. Like, we never really talked about how you all met. I know you said teachers. And, I knew she was a teacher or educator before she became a lawyer from what I read. But how did you two end up getting together?
Well, Lynne Stewart was a librarian, and it was her first year at teaching. I believe she was 23 years old, and I was 28. And I had taught 6 years in Pittsburgh, and I came to New York as an experienced teacher. We all believed that New York was the promised land where the streets were paved with gold and opportunity was there. And now we all know the lie that it was. But I went to New York because after being close to a double master's degree, I went for a promotion. And the guy who was the head, Bobby Sperber, who had been I'll never forget this, who had been at Notre Dame University, it said, where they didn't have black guys on the football team at the time, it said, you should be very happy that you have a job at all. And I says, here I am, 28 years old, and I've reached the ceiling. I should be happy that I have a job at all. And so I asked for my retirement, and in 15 minutes I had my pension, everything. Like they didn't need no uppity ends in their situation. And I was a successful teacher. And so I ended up in New York across the hall from Lynne Stewart. And these were the days when Malcolm X was coming to Harlem, and he used to hold fort at a place called 35 West 135th Street, a restaurant. And all of the teachers would go and listen to him talk. And we would go and listen. And he was under Elijah Muhammad at the time. and he would talk about Islam. And my question was, well, I consider the Muslims almost as culpable in slavery as the Christians. You know, like they were very much involved. So if it didn't do anything for them, how's it going to do anything for me? And the idea that Islam was colorblind was ridiculous. It is not. And so one day Lynn says, well, why do you go sit down and debate Malcolm on these issues? Why don't you start your own group? And I did. And Lynn was one of the first people who joined. And it was for the community control of the schools to improve the education of the people in inner city communities, mainly New York City. And then it grew from there. We were both married. I won't lie about that. She had a husband and I had a wife. And over the years, the situation grew, and we both got divorced, and we had a young child who was a doctor, and we took care of families equally. We agreed to that if we do have this situation, as many people do, we are going to deal with the families equally, and we did that. And now the baby is a doctor, head of one of the departments at Bellevue, the largest hospital in New York. Wow. And lawyers, doctors, CPAs, accountants. You know, we have been very fortunate in the children that we have raised. And that was that. When we got together, there was no change in that. And then the struggles of the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And we remained together and I would say it started in 1963. And here we are. The struggle has never changed. The issues have never changed. And we have never changed. Committed to the struggle and committed to each other. And this is how we have survived. So, yeah, we started out as teachers, and then I went to jail. Because what had happened was you couldn't be a principal in New York City if you were black. Can you imagine that?
Oh, New York City, land of milk and honey, right? I mean, the streets paved with gold.
That's right. When I got, it was shocking to me because I assumed, you know, the place that had better housing laws on the books than the federal housing laws. But I didn't look at the reality. It was the most segregated city in the world, even though they had better housing laws than the federal housing laws in the 60s. And so we didn't look at that. And so when I got there and I realized this, is how are we going to tell these kids they can be successful when they can't be a stationary engineer, they can't do construction, they can't sell anything to the Board of Ed, they can't sell a book, they can't be a principal. I says, we have to change that. And I got involved, and we fought them in the streets, and the way we would fight them is we wouldn't allow anybody to do construction work. We'd destroy their equipment on the street. We would make it uncomfortable for any principal to be in a system that we didn't approve of. And so we got the first black principal, Leroy Watkins, PS 175, and at the Henry Highland Garnett. Let your motto be resistance, Henry Highland Garnett School on 135th and Lenox. And we continued to fight them. And then when I say fight them, we fought them in the streets. They didn't shoot you out of hand the way they do nowadays. They would try to bully you, beat you with the nightsticks. And they had blackjacks in those days. Well, I could fight. And I was guilty of 4 counts of good self-defense. But they called it 4 counts of assault on police. And so they came up with a deal. I had to go to jail, stop making speeches and holding rallies on the street, and they would give us a list of 15 names of black men. We had to pick 10, but I had to go to jail. Now, people cried, and I'm saying, well, we weren't ready to fight them in the street, so I went to jail. And when I got out, Lynn was a teacher. She had moved from Harlem to the Lower East Side, and she says, I can't do this anymore. We have lost every struggle we've been in. The struggle for community control, the struggle for mothers' rights, the struggle for welfare rights, the struggle for women's rights. She says, I can't do this anymore. Now, I had opened up a motorcycle shop because I couldn't work either. You know, anything that had anything to do with government finances, I would be fired. And there was a reporter who would follow me around, and whenever I got a job, he'd say, do you know who you hired, that radical? bad name, bad word. And so I opened up a motorcycle shop, and right around the corner from where Lynn was teaching on the Lower East Side, 9th Street and Avenue B, and when she says, I can't do it another day, I says, well, what would you want to do? And she says, I thought I'd like to be a lawyer. And I said, well, you're brilliant. You have the tenacity of a bulldog. And I'm saying that would make you a good lawyer. Go to law school. And we discussed it. She went to law school, and the rest is history.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful.
And
wow.
it's like the Lynne Stewart story. And her son is a lawyer, her daughter is a lawyer, her other daughter is a doctor. My son, his oldest, is a nurse. My oldest next daughter was a computer specialist with TheStreet.com, and the youngest daughter, my first wife, works for Citicorp at the home office in Stamford, Connecticut. And so we feel that we have done well by our children. And, everybody had a chance to go to college. And 3 did not want to go. And so we raised them. And they all live, in the New York area. My one son lives all the way in Buffalo, but the rest of the kids are right here. And so we can't complain about that. And so that's how we met, and we've been together all of these years through thick and thin. And she is a trusted. I don't know if any of your members know of Queen Mother Moore.
Tell us about Queen Mother Moore. I know you got it. Go ahead, tell us about it.
Okay, Queen Mother Moore was there when we were struggling in the 60s. And one of the things she said, that woman, and there was a whole question of, race relationships, and there's still a question of race relationships, a black man with a white woman. On both sides, there's a problem. And as Queen Mother Moore, after watching some of the struggles, she said to me, Ralph, one thing, this woman will never betray you. And so Queen Mother had it right on the nail, hit the nail right on the head. And there were moments, and many of our good brothers are in jail and have been there for many a moon. And let me silence this dog. And for many a moon. And but for decent people, I would be there too. Shut up and sit down.
Well, Brother Brown, I want to ask you about this. I know you skipped over you went to Rikers Island, correct? Where you got sentenced to for your...
I didn't hear what you said, sir.
You went to Rikers, right, for your jail time?
Yes, I was at Rikers Island. And in 1969, we took it over.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, what had happened was, you see, I like to tell people the story. I went to schools before there was integration. We were just the black family in the white, community. And small town in western Pennsylvania. And I went to the schools, and I was just saying the other day that what my experience informed me to the degree that I became a good teacher, because I knew why the kids didn't like it, because school didn't relate to them. And I stopped liking school when the first person they talked about who wasn't a slaver was John Brown. Then they said he was crazy. Then I says, I don't like these people. That was 4th grade, and they don't like me, and so be it. But I went to Duquesne University, went to the University of Pittsburgh, went to Carnegie Institute of Technology before it was called Carnegie Mellon, and then when I went to jail, I got an education. And when I walked in Rikers Island, and saw that the lunchroom that seated 500 people and 470 were black and Latino, I said, now this is a problem. This is where this society is going. This was way back in the 60s. And when, I began speaking in the yard, because they kept me confined. And I figured, well, maybe they're doing it because I'm a teacher. I never stole anybody's purse. I was never involved in so-called criminal activity. Why am I locked up here and other people are going to the yard? Well, the moment they let me go to the yard, I began speaking, talking to the guys in the yard. And the guys in the yard understood. They said, hey, you seem to know a lot, but you don't know how to organize. Now, we're going to help you organize, and everybody's going to listen. Well, 2 months after that, we shut the place down. And we won. And then only then did I understand why I was kept from the community of criminals because I could organize. And Lynne says they will never allow you to do that because all of the political prisoners are kept in constant lockdown. They have no association with the other inmates. He says they know better than that. They keep guys away from people who can teach them anything. They shut down all of the programs, the education programs. They are not about that. They are about oppression. And so when I got out of jail and went back to the community, the Harlem community had a celebration for me. And as I went to just as I walked in the building, the auditorium was filled. Somebody says, "Come aside, come to the lunchroom, I want to talk to you." And when I went to the lunchroom, they says, "All of the things that you had fought for are gone. We lost them. The politicians gave them away. But we didn't tell you because we were afraid that you wouldn't come if you realized that, and the community wants to celebrate you. So come on in for the celebration." So I went in for the celebration. It was a wonderful celebration, but it was another education. See, you can't pick politicians, and I didn't pick them, but the politicians gave back the struggle that we won in the 60s, and I'm talking Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
All of the inner cities of America are controlled by the Democratic Party, and how come we don't have a decent education system in the inner cities? And it is not because of the color of the skin or the culture, as one of the writers in the New York Times said. It's the culture of the black community, because I was in Cuba, and I saw the culture. You would think you're in the middle of Harlem, and it's one of the most educated countries on the planet. People speak in 3 languages. Children who are civil and understand where they are and understand that the Europeans have organized the world according to color, and you can go from country to country. The people are closest to white are the ones that they support in control. And the darker you are, going right through to Colombia, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bluefield, all of these small countries have their negative attitude towards people of color. And this is because the Europeans designed it that way, and they hate Fidel because he denied that. He broke that situation where people of color were denigrated because they had color. And so I understood that that was not a proper situation, and I learned by going around the world and seeing things. I learned when I walked in to Rikers Island. I learned when I went to Cuba, which is one of the places that, as Lynne said, she noticed. She says, "You're not walking around for the first time since I met you with your dukes up, ready to fight in a defensive position." And I said to her, yes, because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel threatened as I walked around in Cuba. And so, yeah, we get educated, we go to schools, we think we know something, and then we find out there's much that we do not know. And this is a part of my education. I knew what I knew, but I had no idea what I didn't know, but my mind was open to learning it. And I did learn it.
Yes, sir. I want to play a quick clip. A quick clip of Lynne Stewart talking during the interview, and we'll get back to this wonderful discussion. But everybody, y'all can go to LynneStewart.org. We've been posting it on the chat room, and I also been posting it on Facebook, sending out email blasts, and we'll keep on doing it until Lynne comes home. So this is very important that people know about this. But we'll play a clip from Lynne talking at an interview, and we'll get back to our discussion.
Why would they pick on a little old grandmother?
I had this argument with my defense committee, actually. They wanted to play up the grandmother, and I said, they didn't pick the grandmother, they picked the activist, the 40-year activist, that young woman that came to Harlem and was so astounded by what she saw there, she couldn't believe she was still in America, that no one had ever told her that this is how black people were forced to live, and who has never retreated from that position, who has said, if they lied to me about that, what else are they lying about? Whoops, here comes Vietnam. Well, that's on the agenda now. And then through the next 40 years with Ralph fighting that lie and for the people.
And Brother Ralph.
Did anybody say it better than that? I
love
it.
But y'all, you know what? Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Pardon?
You go ahead and finish. I'm sorry, I'm listening. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm thrilled listening to that. I heard it before, but can anybody say it better? One of the things that a prosecutor said about Lynne Stewart, he said, I disagree with everything she says, but nobody ever said it better. Whatever she is, you can't say it better. This is the voice we need out here talking. You know, can you imagine? Here she is, you know. You can't say it better than that.
I mean, but I just look at your relationship. It's so powerful. You are like dynamic people as individuals who come together. Y'all a force of nature. I mean, it's crazy that y'all was able to found each other like that. I mean, I'm just very respectful of what y'all was able to build, and you know, I get the fruits that come from the tree. Like you talk about your children being very, very successful, even from previous relationships, the kids were successful or are successful. It shows there was a lot of love there. They had a lot of love to give, and y'all gave it without, stacking stocks, you say.
Yeah, well, Lynne made statements that were, so clear. One of the things she said was she could never send a child of color to the New York City public school system because it was so racist. So she had 2 white children that she sent to the New York City public school, but a child of color, and said, we got to put her in the private school because racists break her before she's able to defend herself. And when she graduated from the private school, we had her tested, and she tested a college freshman. And then she went to the public junior high school in the so-called nice neighborhood in Chelsea. And she came home from school and says, I'm in special ed. And I says, oh, you mean in a special class? Now, I'm a teacher. Lynne was an ex-teacher. And she says, no, special ed. So I went to the school, and they had put her, who tested college freshmen in 7th grade, in special ed.
Wow.
Well, I straightened that out instantly. And as I said to her when we were walking out of the school, I says, I'm here to defend you. And who's defending all of these other children? And they're doing the same thing to them. And when she got into the school, the principal says, well, go talk to the teacher. And so we went, and then I asked the teacher, how could you put her in special ed? So she said, well, she can't read. So I said, take any book, take any teacher's manual, any book you have here. And so the teacher got a book very nervously, and, of course, she read it. And so she says, well, it didn't sound that good when you read it. And my daughter was very angry. She says, yes, I did. I read everything you handed me. I did all of the math you handed me. And why did you do that to me? And the teacher's face turned red, and she kept saying, and why did you do that? And, of course, that was her education. This is the world you're in. But she graduated from the public schools, the highest honor of anybody ever in the history of the school, 22 honors. As a graduate, she was a Westinghouse scholar. She did everything. But she had learned racism. Never forgot it. You see, so this is, this is America. This is where we are. But the thing was, we told all of our children the truth. And Lynne's oldest son, by her first marriage, her middle son, by her first marriage, he was a teacher. And when he came home from school, he cried. And he says, I know why they hate me, because of the work you and Mom have done for the people of our community. And this was the poor community. But how can they mistreat these children? So I says, I guess you better follow your mother's footsteps in law. And he did, where he could fight the system one-on-one, just like his mother, and give people a decent representation. And then her oldest daughter, after teaching, who was very angry with the school system and had a quick lip, and she, too, became a lawyer, where her quick lip would help her. Wow. And so she, so we're a fighting family, for justice in our community.
Wow.
It's, it's the only way to live. We told the children the truth, and they were able to handle it. This is the truth. Now go out and find it. Compare what we say to what happened. And for our youngest daughter, that was a shocker, to be an honor student, coming out of 6th grade, being able to read on a college freshman level, taking a test, and then going to a school and being put in special ed. And I says, what about all those other kids who are not so outstanding and don't have parents who are going to go and fight them? As a matter of fact, one of the people who have been very instrumental in the struggle for Lynne Stewart, that's Betty Davis, a teacher who, honor student, went to the schools in the system. When they had one black here and one black there in the 70s, she passed all the tests and was a top scholar and went to the schools. And as she said, when you come to the public schools, from day one, it's total racism. And she says her folks were from the South. They didn't know to go to school and fight. And so she says when they, gave her a B when it should have been an A, she says they didn't know. They just felt, hey, you're the smartest in the class, and that's all that matters, no matter what they give you. And she got honors, but not as many as she should have gotten. And I think of how many kids were in that position, how many kids were destroyed because there wasn't a political organization or an institution to fight on their behalf, and all of our children are in that position now.
Yes,
there is not an institution to support them, and they shoot each other because there's nobody teaching them better.
That's right.
Yeah, that's true. Well, Sister Queen, you got anything to say or add?
Well, just really quick on what he just spoke about. I experienced the same thing, and I've told this story many times before. When I went to daycare school, I was the only black child there, and I was teaching some of my white classmates how to read, but they put me in like a special ed reading class, and I had been reading for years. My parents can attest to that. So it continues to happen. So I know.
Yeah, well, you see, the story is changed, and they changed the names, but it doesn't protect anybody. We're still in big trouble, and I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, it's a common story. It happened to you, too.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in the 70s. I was born in 1971.
Yeah.
So that was in the 70s.
Yeah, that's not so long ago. Not so long ago. And so here we are fighting the fight. And the government, as Lynn says, when you fight that right, just fight. They never forget you. They never forgot or forgave Lynn for fighting that fight, but she never stopped fighting it. And I like when you play those clips. It's that's who she is, and they don't want to hear that. And
Go ahead, sorry, because Brother Ralph. Go ahead.
Can you imagine what it is now with this added experience? She said she spent a lot of time in jails visiting her clients, but it is different when she's in jail as a client.
Oh, wow.
And smarter than all of the lawyers who are so-called representing her with their problems, their backgrounds, not nearly as well-rounded and as erudite as Lynne Stewart. And so there, like she's in the position, and one day I was talking to her in jail, and I'm saying, these damn lawyers, and she says, Ralph, you have to understand, that's why they're out there, and I'm in here.
Smart, brilliant woman. Wow. You figured it out. But it's kind of like, remind me, I think about your wife, I'm thinking about Lenny Bruce. How he was so smart, and they punished him for being so smart.
Yeah.
And understanding what was going on.
He said too many truths that they didn't deal with.
Exactly.
And he was, he was something. And this is the nature of a society. Lynn says lawyers are basically conservative by nature. They go to school, they're conservative. They're not for changing anything. They're not for pushing the law. They're for operating within the law as the law is prescribed to them. And it is prescribed to lawyers as certain people have more rights than others. They accept that. The corporate lawyers are there to cheat the government. And people go to school to learn how to become successful criminals. And the other lawyers are there supposedly to defend those against accusations. It's a whole different role, but they accept that role. And if you were helping somebody helping the poor to beat the law, you're considered an in-house lawyer, and you are prosecuted as a criminal in forwarding the criminal enterprise. But we see corporations are criminal enterprises, and the lawyers work to support that criminal enterprise. It's just like the guy at Apple said, well, we wrote the laws to that effect. I don't have to pay taxes. I think there are 6,000 planes in the air, jet engines per hour at any given moment of the night and day. And I think 6,000 of them are made by GE, and they don't pay taxes. Hey, what about that? Well, they have lawyers to take care of that. And what is that but a criminal enterprise? And now you can take GE and then go right down the line. What do corporate lawyers do? Help corporations to steal from the government. And if you represent the poor and are part of that, then you are justifiably prosecuted as an in-house attorney, which Lynne Stewart never was. She never supported anybody to break the law. She defended people who were accused of breaking the law, which is coming from a different angle. And so we have, this is, another, as Lynn says, another wart on the face of the legal system in America.
Well, it sounds like what you said, saying, Brother Ralph, that the real American gangsters, they make the law. They own the law. And I was speaking of American gangsters, I just want to talk about a little bit about your encounter with Frank Lucas, because he's supposed to be the American gangster. The real crooks on Wall Street, it sounds like.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about that in your encounter with Frank Lucas, if you can.
Well, in the early days, one of the things that I understood, that America is a criminal enterprise. And I go right to the Kennedys to talk about the history of John F. Kennedy and his father. And we all know the history of Joe Kennedy. Right. He was a bootlegger. He bought the Congress. He knew exactly when the law would change. He had signed up all of the people to buy his Canadian and import of alcohol because he had corrupted the American government and had put him in a position when alcohol became legal at the end of Prohibition. Now his son becomes president. So this is an instance where bad money becomes good.
Right.
And so we see a whole history of bad money becoming good, like the mafia, and we go back to slavery. Bad money becomes good money. And until they pay back the money that was earned in slavery, it's all bad money. And so when I was operating, I said, look, we need operating capital, and we need to go to the criminals to get the money, because they have a lot of money. They're buying Mercedes and Cadillacs and nonsense. And so somebody says, listen, let me hook you up with a meeting with Frank Lucas. Would you take the money? I said, you bet. I want to organize. And we don't have money. We have to take from the organizers to organize. We would pay our office bill before we paid our rent. And we were scheduled to be put out of the projects we were in many times because we had no money. And so I went to Frank and I was talking about, why I needed money. I would be accountable. And he started talking about how you can't win and don't waste your time. And you could never, and well, after a while, it was his money that I was talking about, but I became hostile. What do you know about movements? What movements have you ever been in? What have you ever done for the people? I'm not talking about selling drugs. You could tell me about that, but you can't tell me about movement. And you could see how a conversation like that could get heated. And, the Queen Mother Moore says, okay, gentlemen, settle down. I just thought that you should hear it direct. not what somebody said, but what Ralph said, and he can hear what you said. And if you're not going to come up with any money, let's end the meeting pleasantly. Well, he paid for the meal.
So was he as intimidating as he sounded? I mean, like, how they portrayed him was.
No, well, he was. He had people.
Mm-hmm.
But let's go back to the '60s. I had people too.
Right.
We both had people.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't my people talk to your people. It was me talking to him. And he threw some money on the table and said, "Excuse me," and left. End of the story.
Well, man, actually, just about Guy Fisher. Just interesting. I know you have an interest next to Guy Fisher.
Yes, it's interesting. Now, I had a very brilliant young lady in I believe it was my fourth. It could have been a fifth grade class. Brilliant. And, she was moved on, and we both moved on. And like I says, when I went to jail, Lynn went to law school. And so one day we're at MCC, and we bump into her. And I says, "Hey, what are you doing here?" "Well, Guy Fisher's my man." I says, "Oh, my goodness." And so she says, "I was talking to him about you and Lynn and boom." And so he says, and Bill Kunstler was his lawyer at the time. So he wanted to meet with me. So I went to meet with him, and I says, "Hey, your case is over." And I says, "You're in it." And he says, "Oh, my God, I wish I had known that Renee knew you." And boom. And so we had conversations. And after a while, I said to him, I says, "Well, listen, I wish we had met when you're on the outside." I says, "Either we would both be very rich, I'd have to kill you." One of the things he had said to me is he says, you seem pretty smart. And he was a brilliant young man. He just got off, he got into the business that was there. Like I was in a coal steel town. There was no question what I was going to do. Doing the coal mines and the steel mills. That's what was there. And he got into what was there, but he was brilliant. So he says, "I bet I know something that you don't know." And I'm saying, "Well, tell me." And he says, "I know you never shoot anybody never have somebody in your new BMW and shoot them with a .357 Magnum." And I says, "Well, what's that mean?" He says, "Man, a flame comes out of that thing 6 inches long." And he says, "I burnt up the inside of my new car." I didn't know that.
Wow. Okay.
And so, anyway, it was wild. It was, and he believed. And you see, one of the things I said was, you see, we people in the movement have a contract. We have a contract where we're dedicated to each other. And you people in that other enterprise don't have a contract. Your contract is money. There's no loyalty about it. And you can look at the history of the people who ratted him out. His boss ratted him out. And he ratted out the mother of his child, the boss, not Guy Fisher. And I'm saying, you see, in our movement, we count on our camaraderie. In your movement, there is none. It's about $1. And so, it's, I was there.
Well, I want to ask you about your thoughts about Malcolm. Like, you look at him now, how he's being, I guess, revered or whatever, how they portray him now. What was your thoughts about him at the time when you were trying to work with him or you was listening to him?
Yeah, he was a good man. He believed in religion. And when the Weather Underground came to me, because the connection was Lynn as white, and let's be clear about it, in the movement, it was color. And there were separate movements. It was not one movement. Although they had white members, Sylvia Baraldini, etc., there were people in the BLA, Black Liberation Army, and Marilyn Buck, good people. But the movement was separate. When the Weather Underground came to me and says, "Ralph, we have pictures of Malcolm's bodyguards in uniform. Get Malcolm to come and see." And so we scheduled a meeting in Shirley Rector's office. I can say that because I believe Shirley Rector is now dead. She was Percy Sutton's secretary when Percy Sutton was borough president of New York. And I scheduled the meeting, and they came with their film, and Malcolm refused. He says, "You wouldn't know because these brothers pray with me, and you never will." and I'm not a religious person. I don't pray with anybody, any prayers. But I says, here's the film. And he says, I won't lower myself to watch a film supposedly about my brothers. Well, there were the guys who were there, his bodyguards in uniform, and, Malcolm was killed. He didn't believe it. He believed too much in the religion thing. And I says, religion has nothing to do with it. Whether you have it or don't have it, you are what you do. And anybody can fake it. Well, I choose not to fake it. And there you have it.
But I've been thinking about what happened with his grandson recently and what happened to the grandfather. It's like they just made the wrong choice of people.
I have no idea. I knew he was a young man who had troubles. I've heard different stories, but nothing that I could repeat to say had any validity to him. I have not the foggiest what was happening down in Mexico. I've heard stories, but I wouldn't support him.
Mike is a critical thinker, as a private investigator, somebody who's been trained to find the truth when it's not obvious. What are your thoughts? I mean, what questions should we be asking about what went down with Malcolm Shabazz in Mexico City that aren't being asked, you think?
Well, it's due to Lynn. I never believed in redemption until the question of Matthias Reyes came along. That was the young man who stepped forward and confessed to the rape of the woman who was raped in the Central Park.
Central Park 5.
Park joggers.
Yeah. Okay, I got it.
And some people in prison, some of Lynn's ex-clients said, there's a man in trouble and you need to see him. And Lynn sent me to see him. When I saw him and he told me his story, he says, I did it. And I says, and why? Yeah, I says, the whole world wants the head of these young men. And he said, I have found God. And he says, and I'm not afraid of anything. And he says, he is guilty of rape of 8 different people. But he says, I found God. And he says, when I die, he says, and I go before God, it's going to be with a clean slate. And he said, these kids had nothing to do with this. And he knew, I says, why didn't they find the weapon? He says, it was a tree branch. And I says, you got to give me more than that. Jesus. It's something. So I says, well, just go through this rape. And as he went through it, how he knocked her down and dragged her down into a hollow around the street. And he says, and then she started to wake up, and I grabbed the stone. And he says, and I hit her with it. And he says, shut up, get out of here. That's why he has the bruises. Let me get you in a minute. And she had the bruises. And so when I says, well, I got to find that stone. And he says, there'll be blood on it. And there was, and he had done it. And from then on, I believed in redemption. I figured a rapist, what can you do with anybody like that? Well, he was a rapist, and he redeemed himself. What can you say? And he said they didn't want it, and they were going to punish him for it. And he knew he was going to be punished. And I tell you, I visited many political prisoners, but I never visited anybody who the guards watched closer. They insisted that they sit right beside us with a low fence, like about a 3-foot-high wall, and they leaned like they were looking in his mouth when he spoke. And he talked about the crime and how he had done it. And so, it was, I just sat and listened to him, and I says, that is surely redemption. Come here. That is surely, and he redeemed himself. And, it was okay.
Well, Brother Ralph Owners, thank you once again for sharing your time, because that's one of the most important things you can give somebody, or valuable things, is time. And we'll be pushing forth this information, get it circulating among the people, because I believe that information is the true currency of the universe. Knowledge is power. Information is backed by knowledge. So we're going to get this information out there. Do you have any last words or thoughts you'd like to offer before we part ways? And happy Father's Day, because you did a phenomenal job with your kids.
What I would say is we must learn to support those people who support us. And Lynne Stewart has been a supporter of us and the truth. And if we can't do that, then the question is, do we deserve to live? do we deserve to exist? And there's no law that says that we must exist as a people. And so until we get it right in terms of supporting those who support us, we will shortly be a people of the past. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening to this whole, wow. These stories on Lynne Stewart, she deserved it, but very few people, as you had mentioned in the beginning of your program, the media does not tell her story. And I hope it was recorded and you can play it and replay it again and again.
We're going to disseminate. We're going to break it down. All this information told that I'm going to put out there, video form and everything. I mean, like this was a teaching about Sister Lynne Stewart, and also Brother Ralph. This was, people. It's sad that people don't know who Queen Mother Moore was. I mean, it's funny because you mentioned like Queen Mother Moore, like she was phenomenal. We don't know our history. We don't know where we come from.
Once upon a time, I asked her. I says, "Okay, how is it that you are so brilliant?" And her answer was as follows: "I went all the way to the 3rd grade, and I didn't want to waste any of it." Because one day while riding down, and as a young person, I said the person of this brilliance shouldn't be walking around anywhere. And I had a car, and I was a teacher, so I took her to every meeting she wanted to go to, and I just listened and learned. So one Friday evening late, we're driving down 125th Street, and she lived in the Bronx. And she said, "Look out the window. Tell me what you see." And I looked, and I says, "Well, I see Harlem. What should I see?" And she says, "You are seeing it like you will never see it again." I didn't know what she was talking about. Well, you drive down 125th Street today.
Right.
It is gentrified out of existence, 125th, 116th, 145th. Harlem is going to become, and as she said to me, if you want to vote in Harlem, you will have to have an address in Staten Island because they're going to change. They're going to gerrymander the lines. And when I heard that, she made a point, and I had to laugh. If you want to vote in Harlem, you're going to have an address in Staten Island. They're going to mess up those lines. And so that Charlie Rangel, who sold Adam Clayton Powell, will be the last black congressperson from Harlem. So Mother Moore saw that 50 years ago.
Wow.
Look well, you will never see it like this again. And it's like, holy mackerel.
She called it. Wow.
Yeah, she did.
I'm actually go ahead, I'm sorry.
She went all the way to the 3rd grade and didn't waste any of it.
Well, I'm glad to hear. So the system ain't necessarily broke if you stop at the 3rd grade. Okay, I got you. Well, actually, did you ever hear about Percy Sutton? I know you're Malcolm's lawyer. I heard that Dick Gregory and some other folks claimed that he was CIA. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah. Well, if he wasn't, he should have been.
Okay, there you go. Great answer. And one more thing, I love talking to you. When I first met you, I didn't know what you was all about, and then you spent that time with us back in March after the City of McKinney meeting, and you had all these stories. You're the man who led 1,000 lives. And you only just, I believe, 79 years young, but you just had so much experience, so many different lives, so many different reinventions. And I want to ask you, considering that your wife is Lynne Stewart, Sister Lynne Stewart, which is, she is like what Duke Ellington said, beyond category, and so you are also beyond category. What has been the most impressive person you met in your lifetime? Who has been?
Well, you're right there when you talk about Queen Mother Moore. She was, and Lynn always reminds me that the first day after I had met Queen Mother, I had made a speech, and she says, well, you must come to my house. And one of the things, she says, well, you say you're going to work for the people, and you're doing pretty good, and you're working on education. She says, but what are you going to do when they take that little refrigerator you got in Queens? I was living in Queens at the time. She says, well, I'm going to go I'm going to continue fighting. She said, what are you going to do when they take your home? A little home you got. And I said, well, I think I'm going to continue. And she proceeded, what are you going to do when they put you out of work and put your children on welfare? And I'm saying, wow, like black people have survived on welfare before, and I assume my children will survive as well as anyone else's. And she says, now stop the meeting. This is the one. You ready? Because this is what they're going to do to you. And we're going to hold you to those answers.
Wow. I wish I could have been.
And they did it all. They did it all.
Wow.
Lost the job, went to jail, came out, couldn't work. And she said all of the things. He said, now what are you going to do? And, with her expression, and just so many things she had said. This is what's in store for you. Be ready. And she was brilliant. And, and I learned so much. And Lynn likes to tell the story is when I got home and I says, I met this woman, and she's so knowledgeable. She knows everything. So, and I was 30 years old and a college graduate, and I had been fighting this fight. Mm-hmm. Boy, she went into the Scottsboro boys, and she went into public officials, and there's so many things where our officials, like Jess Greenup, and all of the money that we have lost. This isn't the first time. We lost it with land. We lost when the organizations got together in an umbrella organization to keep their federal funds, and then the banks failed, and then you could only get a maximum per account, and all of the money was in one account. And I'm saying, and who decided in putting the money in the account? What lawyer? And just so many times we have been sold out by those who claim to support us. How many times did they redo the Apollo Theater? They're still redoing it. Where does that money go? And you just look, and then the sellout of Adam Clayton Powell by Charlie Rangel, Joe Overton, it was just criminal. But, black people just go for it time and time again. And you realize that the political institution in the black community is just a corrupt institution of the Democratic Party who owns all the politicians. And so what's surprising about Obama? But then, what's surprising? And so that's where we are. And, we're in big trouble. Big trouble. And programs like this will help get us out because, as they say, the truth shall set you free or set you on the path to freedom.
Yes, sir. Well, Brother Ralph, thank you once again for spending so much time with us today. It's an honor. I've been wanting to do this for a while since I met you, and I'm just honored by your presence, connected with using our platform to get the word out about what's going on with Sister Lynn. And, like in the words of the great Duke Ellington, we love you both badly. And keep doing the great fight. And we're going to do our part to get this information out there. And
thank you so much, and I look forward to being on your program again with Sister Lynn.
It'd be an honor. Wow.
Awesome.
Yes, sir. And thank you, Queen Ashura. Thank you so much for helping me host today. Appreciate it.
And it was so wonderful listening to you, Brother Poynter. And we know that Lynn will be returned to you soon.
Yes.
Okay, thanks again. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you all. Thank you.
My name is Lynne Stewart. I strongly encourage you to know your rights and fight for them. U.S. Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas once reminded a group of young lawyers that the guarantees of the Bill of Rights are, quote, not self-executing. We have to continually make them work. As nightfall does not come all at once, Douglas added, neither does oppression. In both instances, there is a twilight when everything remains seemingly unchanged. And it is in such twilight that we all must be most aware of change in the air, however slight, lest we become unwitting victims of darkness.